Hey guys, in today's training video, I will share with you a creative way to attack the modern Italian system. So that is the Italian game with bishop c4, where after bishop c5 or knight f6, white is playing just a very solid d3 systems. For example, castles, knight f6, d3, d6, and now the main move of c3, with the idea that in many cases white's going to play kind of like a Roy Lopez, wanting to bring his knight towards g3, so that when white does finally put his pawns in the center with d4, it'll mean that the e4 pawn will be very well defended by the white pieces as such. So it's a more strategic approach, and if you want to attack the opponent's king quite early, then you're going to absolutely love this training, where I will show you how one of the best blitz players on chess.com, one of the best bullet players on lead chess, Daniel Naroditsky, plays the following attacking system, where we'll make a4 our main line just because it's the most common trend. At a higher level, with ideas of making some room for the bishop to retreat if knight a5, but also with the ideas of some queenside expansion as well. And here we're not going to play the most common move of castles, which is the main line. I can go h3, you have rook e1, knight f1, white will go d4 or b4, with a very strategic type of position arising. In the database, white scores fairly well from here. But instead, we're going to play the move h6 in this position, with the idea that after rook e1, we'll play the move g5 and go for a very direct attack against the white king, already putting a lot of early pressure on white's position. By the way, if you're enjoying this video so far, do make sure to subscribe to the channel. But let's see a few examples of how this can play out. It's not going to be a super detailed analysis, but just giving you a few ideas to work with for your games. Knight f1 is the move that you'll face in the vast majority of your games, with the idea that after g4, white will normally play knight 3 to d2, and try to sort of organize the placement of his knights. But after h5, we do get a pretty strong attack with h4 and g3. For example, after knight e3, black normally plays the move h4 in this position, and after white's knight d to f1. There are a few ways that you could play this as black. One is just to build up very steadily. For example, a move like queen e7, and is going for bishop d7 and long castle scores pretty well for black in practice. The computer admittedly does think that white is doing pretty well though after b4, and white can go for b5 and get some initiative on the queen side. So this is something we have to be a little bit careful about, and something that, even though black is scoring very well at this point, objectively white also has a pretty good position, and I would not necessarily feel entirely comfortable playing this position after bishop a2, as it's not so clear where our king is going in a sense. Computer saying that it's playable to castle long, but it's not really something you want to do in a practical game, to castle into their attack. So my suggestion instead is going to be to play a little bit of an improvement, which has actually not been played in any games on lead chess, and also in master games it's only been played in one game, and that is the move bishop takes e3. This is my almost novelty. Well, it was played in one game with a 2-100 player. But the idea is we can now go h4, and basically after knight f1, white isn't able to keep his knights covering the center, and we can play knight h5. We clear the way for queen f6, and we get very good counterplay. With the move g3, we're just going to play it as a pawn sack. Okay, if knight e3, we're not even sacking a pawn technically. But we get to open up the lines around the white king, and this sort of position is just absolutely fine for black. Even the ending is quite playable after queen f3. You could keep the queens on as well, but I think, the easiest is just to swap queens. Go bishop e6, castle long, rook g8, and you will get good counterplay against the white king, even with the queens off the board, and the fact you have f4 as a square for the knight is, of course, also very pleasant. So we see that in the most common continuation by white, that black is actually doing pretty well here. And, if they play knight b3, that just leaves the white knight's a bit awkward. I'd probably just go h4 and then play g3 next move, where you'll sacrifice a pawn but just open up the h-file for a nice attack on the white king. And if they play a move like knight h4, just trying to blockade the whole kingside pawn storm, this would be a very good move, except for the fact that here black has knight takes e4. Nice little tactic after d4, queen h4. We have won a pawn, and to be fair, if white plays correctly with bishop e3, he probably does have sufficient compensation, just because, he will have some play on the queen side, and, the knight can also come in at d5, so white definitely has its chances, but black is also not in any kind of danger. You can also just go h5 even, just let them take you on a7 and continue with, the standard attacking ideas as black. So knight h4, not really anything to fear. Probably the best line for white here, I would say, is to play the move b4. You don't really need to fear d4, because you can go g4, and white doesn't really get enough for the pawn there. But b4 is a thing, and admittedly this is the move that does give white an advantage if he plays correctly. But I think the position is still playable enough that in faster time controls, going knight h7, g4, and charging the pawns, you'll still get very decent attacking chances, and the fact that black is scoring a 71% win rate, actually it comes to a 75% score of all the games. From this position already speaks volumes to how practically dangerous this is from white's point of view. For example, knight b3 is the most common move, but after g4, we are bringing the piece in the attack. Queen h4 is coming. If they defend with queen e2, we go g3 even, and we can force open the g file. Or you could also play knight g5. This has led to a couple of wins on Lee chess. You go like knight e7, you go bishop e6 or f5, but just bring the knights around to attack the king. Definitely puts the onus on white to defend accurately. That much is clear. But yeah, this is kind of the worst case scenario. I mean, if your opponent has analyzed with the engine, then yeah, maybe they go king h1, sack the pawn on f2 and get an advantage. But, you can always play like castles and revert back to admittedly a marginally worse version of the normal Italian lines, but, you are still able to go for the f5 break. You definitely still have reasonable counterplay on a practical level. In a human perspective, I think king h8 would be a nice move to try, just clearing the way for f5 and getting that, play with the pawns. Almost like a King's Indian, where we're pawn storming the white king here. Now, if we go back to this position, let's go to this one. Something that you'll see quite a bit in this is a move like h3, which you'll see at a lot of different points. Probably the move you'll see it most frequently is in this position here on move 6. It's actually more common than the move c3, believe it or not, at Lee chess. But turns out to be, I think, a small mistake, because after a6, they'll normally play c3 anyway, because, knight c3 just doesn't give white a good pawn break to play with. We can go, well, I was going to say bishop a7. I guess you could start with h6 as well if you want to be a little more flexible. But, so after a4, bishop a7. And something like rook e1, again, g5 is now actually a lot more effective than the other lines, because when we play g4, we're going to open up the g file and get a very nice attack down that g file. For example, if white plays d4, this is the most common move where they try to hit back in the center against the flank attack. But that principle doesn't really work here. After h takes g4, we can actually take back with the knight, which I think is even better than the bishop. We go queen f6, rook g8, we'll probably castle long, push the h-pawn. And one could go deeper, but I think you can see that black has a very strong attack, 80% score in the database, so you're welcome for all the free wins you're going to get when your opponents stumble into this trap. By the way, this is actually these sorts of positions and just how to play e4, e5 in general is something I do actually cover in a lot more detail in the Club Player Expert repertoire, which is a repertoire for both white and black to help you get from like an 1800 to a 2000 plus level pretty quickly. So you can definitely check that out in the checkout link in the comments below. If white goes bishop e3, yeah, again, you can just go g4 and, still get this very strong attack, like h takes, bishop e3. And yeah, I mean, in this position, knight g4, and we're just going to flood the pieces toward the king side. Like queen f6 is good, h5, h4, h3 is good, rook g8 is pretty nice. And you can see it's a very similar attacking plan each time, right? So, in fact, the best move for white might be to play bishop e3, just trying to anticipate this. But even here, g5 is still a nice move. You can still play for g4. It's admittedly not ideal that your rook gets stuck on a7, but it's not the end of the world. Still g4 is coming. Or if they do play knight h2 trying to stop it, well, you can go rook g8 and get in g4 anyway for pretty decent counterplay. Computer says white's a little bit better, so I will admit that here it may be better just to trade the bishops if you want to just solidly equalize, but the computer does think g5 is the best move, and it does score the best in the database, so we're going to stick with it. As for other approaches, white can also play the move of bishop to b3, and I'm going to recommend the same approach here as well after knight bd2, h6, and if white plays rook e1 here, again, you're happy to see h3, g5 is just giving you once more a very strong attack, and it's worth pointing out that knight h2 doesn't really succeed in slowing the attack. For tactical reasons, it turns out you can actually play g4 anyway, because after hg4, rook to g8, they can't play f3 to defend the pawn, right, because of the pin on the king, but after queen f3, just don't fall for knight g before queen f7 mate. That would be a little bit sad, but therefore we can just defend the pawn. Knight queen to e7, knight c4, we go knight takes g4. If they take, we're attacking the queen, so, they're not able to take the pawn on h6. Frankly, even if they could take h6, they're probably just getting mated down to h-file there, but you can see for yourself how, in this position, black has a very strong attack. We're going to castle long, charge the h-pawn, play down the g-file, and really the attack kind of plays itself for black here. So this is why white should play rook e1, which is the most common move. But here g5 is actually theoretically quite a good move for black, for white I should say. The positions are maybe a little bit different compared to the a4 line, but I would say you actually get a better version here as black. Say if knight f1, g4, again knight h4, knight e4 is a bit of a problem for white, and if knight 3 to fd2, you could play h5, and yeah, probably just the best move, just h5, g3, and just rip open the king. Say if knight c4, h4, your opponents will normally go bishop e3, just trying to get rid of this bishop pointing, sniping down at that white king. And okay, admittedly this position is not like a forced win for black or anything. White does have pretty decent play, but I'm going to suggest a little bit of a rare move here in the move knight h5, which is, clearing the way for queen g5 to prepare g3. It's definitely in the spirit of the opening, right, to try to attack the white king in this way. If they go d4, I would suggest playing queen g5, just the king can go to g7, and it's a weird position. The computer thinks white's somewhat better, but definitely it's a position where white has to be quite precise and where black, gets the sort of attacking chances he would desire from these positions. If there's not to your taste, I'll point out that, the move h3, it scores very well in the Elite Chess database, and actually, well, I should have just started with this maybe, but this line does score very well, but I think that after ef5, d5, queen d5, I do think that if white plays move f3, he is actually much better, because our queen is going to be very vulnerable to discovered attacks here. So I can't really recommend this, even though it scores very well in the Elite Chess database. Play knight h5, or if not knight h5, at least like bishop d7 and develop steadily, and you'll accept that you're slightly worse, but at least have some attacking chances for it. As for other ways that white can play, I guess in this position, white could play a move such as knight c4, but it's not overly going to change the nature of the play after h5. I guess maybe white could, in this case, well, we transpose back to the earlier position, just with the knights going around the other way as such. And if they do play d4, to be fair, d4 is probably a bit better here than it was in the a4 bishop c4 lines. But still, after g4, if they play knight h4, we can take a pawn. It's a little bit risky, but I do think that objectively black has pretty decent play. You can meet knight f1 with bishop e5, or even bishop e6 is also possible. And just shut down that e-file. Like I said, you're probably going to put the bishop on e5 as a way to not let white kind of get through his pieces while we prepare to get the king out of the danger zone. I'll admit white does score pretty well in this position, but objectively black should be doing okay if he has some decent defensive ability. Also, if they play d5, then these lines can get quite fun actually, where you could play gf3, ef6, and now there's a very fun little move of rook g8 that can be played, or actually probably even better again is to go knight e5 first, so that if they do play knight f3, then you can play bishop g4, and something with this pin you're going to weaken the white king, and with the double pawns you're just going to get a very strong attack. So this is actually an opening trap that I think your opponents could very easily fall into, and in a position like this we can see that even though white is technically a pawn up, that black has a monster initiative down the g-file. His bishop is a lot better than white's, and that's what gives black the advantage here. Rook d8 also to bring the final pieces into the attack. So this is not so great for white, and I think the odds of your opponent finding the computer move knight c4 with a small advantage after queen f6, and actually is it even a small advantage? Maybe, but I still feel like black is doing quite okay all the same. You still get your attacking chances for the pawn after they take and stuff. Well, in the game, well, I keep saying in the game because I'm just like showing full games, but this basically is these are the systems I want to show at you. And let's say if white does for some reason play rook e1 and decide to go h3 here, once again g5, and you can see that h3, this is really bad for white. That's a trap a lot of your opponents will fall into. They'll play h3 before you castle and give you the g5 g4 attack. Even if you only remember that, I think that will be enough to give you very good results in these lines. And also, final move order point, just note that if they do play c3 and then d3 like this, okay, in this case, most of your opponents will castle or play h3 and then castles and transpose back into what we're looking at. Of course, white could play other moves like bishop b3 and try to delay short castling, but that would immediately fall a little bit outside the scope of this, where obviously g5 is only going to be effective when they castle short, so if they keep their king in the center, just play more normally and take it from there. Alright, so that's about all for this video. Hope that you enjoyed it. Do make sure to subscribe to the channel as well if you have been around this channel a bit, watch some of the videos. And alright guys, I'll see you in the next training. Until then, take care.